guys so much, and thank you all for being here. So excited. I've been really looking forward to this. Ben Silbermann, of course, if you don't know, the CEO of Pinterest, the place for social discovery and finding things you love. I know I found many things I love there. Sophia Amoruso, founder and CEO of Nasty Gal, online shopping destination for, let me get this right, rule-breaking and taste-making girls.
That's nice, yeah.
Okay.
We've thrown a lot of stuff out there, and I think that's probably one of the things. Yeah.
And Brian Chesky of AirBnb, CEO and co-founder, obviously the taking on the hotel industry, room and home booking site now worldwide. So one of the reasons I was excited about this is because you're all like the same age, early 30s-ish, right? Yep. So to some people in the audience, you're like babies, and to some people, we're ancient, right? All the Stanford students probably think we're like incredibly old. But you all have such fascinating stories about how you got to where you are, and as young as you are, it wasn't always a straight line. So I just wanted to get the short story. And Ben, I'll start with you, because I know the answer. How many companies did you start before Pinterest, and how did you get here?
Yeah, I mean, I started a bunch. I started like four companies. And I think it's not really well known because none of them had any customers or users, which is why they ended. Yeah, I mean, I took a little bit of a circuitous route, to your point. I was going to be kind of pre-med as an undergrad, and then I took a job in consulting in DC, and when I was out there, I just got really excited about the internet. Pinterest started, I guess now four some years ago with a couple of my friends, Evan and Paul, and that's how it got started.
We do also have a video montage of all of your websites, if we could take a look at that. But Sophia, how about you?
How did
you get here? I know it wasn't a straight line.
Yeah, so I was actually, my last job was almost 8 years ago at 79 New Montgomery Street in the lobby of the Academy of Art University, checking student IDs for $13 an hour. I was 22 years old, and I had time to kind of tool around on the internet, and at that time it was really just MySpace where people were spending their time, and discovered that people were selling vintage clothing on eBay. I wore exclusively vintage clothing, but I had never worked in a clothing store. I had gotten fired from Gimme Shoes, actually, so expensive shoe store, and just thought, like, why don't I do that? You know, working in a lobby wasn't particularly inspiring, and I never really set out to end up on a stage with all of these distinguished people today, but. So it was just like, you know, learning as I went along. So left eBay. I mean, I did everything, and you learn a lot when you do everything. And I think not being unwilling to, you know, pick things up when they're on the floor, or know what the constraints are of everyone as much as you can who's working for you, because you've done those things, is really important. And ultimately realized I was creating a brand on eBay. But I didn't own my customers, you know, there was a lot of rules. I was never very good with rules, so I left eBay and launched nastygalvintage.com, was actually the first URL. We had to buy nastygal.com from, you could guess who owned nastygal.com. But you don't really forget the name, so, and then, yeah, let's see, today we design and retail, women's fashion, clothing, shoes, accessories, now electronics. We have an office in downtown LA, and we're opening a store in a month. Which is terrifying.
Your first brick and mortar store.
Yeah,
right?
Our first.
We're going to talk about terrifying in a second. Brian, you didn't get an MBA, you went to design school instead.
Yeah, so my parents were social workers growing up, and they didn't have a ton of money, so they said, whatever you do, get a job that pays better than the social worker. And so I said, well, I want to be an artist. And they said, well, you pick the one job where you're going to get paid less than the social worker. You're not going to get any money at all. So they made me a deal. They said, I ended up going to Rhode Island School of Design. They said, if you go to RISD, you have to make me a promise. I said, what's that promise? They said, you have to promise that you'll one day get a job that has health insurance. That was their grand ambition for me. So I ended up going to RISD. I met my friend, my co-founder now, Joe Gebbia. I moved to LA working as an industrial designer. and I got this job with health insurance, but I always felt like I could, maybe do a little bit more. I, at RISD, got really inspired to become an entrepreneur, and I kind of think like my life was like I was on this road, and the road in front of me looked exactly like the road behind me, and for some people that's a great thing. For me, that was absolutely terrifying, and so I decided to kind of go this other direction. Joe called me up one day, my friend from RISD, he's living in San Francisco. He says, Brian, come to San Francisco. Now I'm living in a house with 3 of my friends in LA that I got to move across the country. I go into work that day, I quit my job, I leave my house, and with $1,000 in the bank, I pack everything in the back of an old Honda Civic, and I drive up to San Francisco. I get to San Francisco, and like a random Tuesday night, and Joe tells me the rent is $1,150. And that's when I realized I probably should have asked about the rent before I got up to San Francisco. So I have a math problem. I can't make rent. And it turns out that weekend, this international design conference was coming to San Francisco. All the hotels are sold out. So we had this idea, let's just create a bed and breakfast for this design conference, but I didn't have any beds. Joe had 3 air beds. We pulled the air beds in the closet, and we called it the Air Bed and Breakfast.
So your house was the first Airbnb?
Yeah, and I could have never, just to Sophia's point, I could never imagine that I would be sitting on a stage talking about Air Bed and Breakfast. It wasn't meant to be the big idea. It was meant to pay the rent, so we buy time to think of the big idea.
How does it feel to be referred to as Generation Next? I mean, is that like a little bit of pressure?
Yeah.
A lot of pressure?
No one refers to me. Like not daily, but
just Vanity Fair.
Yeah.
Okay, on the note of terrifying, Mark Andreessen was on stage yesterday speaking with Mike Judge, the creator of Silicon Valley, and we got a taste of what it was like for him to start a company. So take a listen to this clip.
It's like, for me, the most honest scene of the entire thing in the first season, the most honest scene was the very last season, which I'll take the risk for anybody who hasn't seen it of spoiling it. The very last scene is the entrepreneur, the founder, has his big successful moment of TechCrunch disruption. And what he realizes is that means he now has to build his company. And he goes outside in the alley and throws up.
Did
right?
you do that?
I didn't. I never. Let's just stress. you live with a very large. People deal with stress in different ways.
Have you ever thrown up? Have you ever been so nervous you threw up?
No.
Okay, Elon Musk has described starting a company as staring into the abyss of death. I've also heard it referred to as like swallowing shards of glass. What is it? How hard is it?
Well, Reid Hoffman said it was like jumping off a cliff and trying to assemble the airplane on the way down. So I thought that was I think for each of us, we had our own crazy journeys. And for us, a lot of people thought Airbnb was the worst idea they ever heard of. And so some people since then have said it's the worst idea in the history of the world that ever worked. So I think that's a compliment, so I'll take that. But we came up with a concept in 2008, and I remember I was completely new to the Valley. I didn't know anything of the Valley. I was a designer. And I remember I come to Silicon Valley, and somebody says there's these people called angels. And I thought he was like a religious freak. I was like, oh God, this is like crazy. But it turns out there are these people who give you money, so we get introduced to like 15 angel investors, and they could have all bought 10% of the company for $100,000 or $150,000. Nobody, no one would even meet with us. That was like how absurd the idea was. So Joe and I basically did what we called the Visa round, which is we just got as many Visa credit cards we could. And you know those binders you put baseball cards in? We put credit cards in those. So we had like $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 of credit card debt, and we were just maxing out every credit card we can get. And I don't think anybody who's thinking to be an entrepreneur should do that. And so then we could stop getting credit cards. Then we started selling collectible breakfast cereal for the Republican and Democratic national conventions. And we came up with this Obama-themed cereal called Obama O's, this John McCain-themed cereal called Cat McCain's, a maverick in every bite. And that actually worked. So we ended up like selling the boxes to the press. It got on like the Today Show and
some lady in my neighborhood was selling this.
Yeah, and so we didn't make much money on, I think in 2008, our first year we launched, we made $8,000 on Airbnb.com, and we made $35,000 on Serial. So Serial was our very first round of funding, and now we'd say we're serial entrepreneurs. Sorry for the bad joke.
So Pinterest, Ben, we actually pulled your board, your Pinterest board, which I'd like to take a look at. Ladies, it's a great place to go to for gift ideas. Very well curated, I must say. But what is your vision for Pinterest on the spectrum from discovery to social network to e-commerce?
I mean, I think we think about Pinterest as a tool where you can discover new ideas, things that are important to you, and save them, and then hopefully go do those things in your real life. I think that right now the internet is still really young. It's like in its infancy, and so people, they have these very broad generalizations, like everything with a user account is a social network. But I think that at Pinterest, we don't think of it as a social network. Rather, we think of it as a tool. And when regular people are saving things, in that process of saving and organizing them, they're organizing them to be discovered by someone else. So our hope is to make that tool the best it can be, and to make it so no matter where you live or what your interest is, we can be the place that you discover things that are meaningful to you.
You rolled out your first ads earlier this year. You call them promoted pins. How's it going?
I think it's going pretty well. It's still early days for us, but the nice thing about Pinterest is that people are there to discover things, and many of the things that they're there to discover anyway are things that are made by companies like products, services, media. And so there's a really tight alignment between why people are there in the first place and the objectives of an advertiser. And I think companies that have that alignment, they work often the best in terms of the experience for a regular person. It doesn't feel like it was grafted on to pay for it. It feels like it's organic. And I've always really admired companies that have found that alignment. I think Google's a company I admire that found that alignment really well in search. And they built, obviously, an amazing and historic business.
You mentioned search. You've made a big push into search and discovery, which has very much helped me as I've tried to decorate my house. How is what comes up on Pinterest, if I search for something on Pinterest, different than the #1 result on Google?
Well, I think that the biggest difference is that everything within the Pinterest index was hand selected by a person, and then it was hand organized into a broader context, and we call that context a board. So every pin goes onto a board. And that naturally means that you can find things that are related, and in a really simple and transparent and not creepy way. They're related because somebody thought all these things belong to the same style of fashion. All these things would look good in my living room. All these things would be fun to do with my kid. And I think that's very, very different. I worked at Google for a little bit. I was doing customer support there, and I think that they have a very technological viewpoint of how information is organized that's obviously incredible. I think at Pinterest it's slightly different. We think that people can organize things in a different and unique way, and that has value too, especially for helping people discover things they didn't even know were out there.
All right. Now, at Nasty Gal, you've been for many years doing a curation of your own, a different kind of curation, and I went on my first Nasty Gal shopping spree this weekend, and it was a tough choice between the double trouble cuffs. This is to give you an idea of the kind of merchandise you'll find on Nasty Gal, and the Not Sorry bracelet, which I felt was much more me, and I'm wearing it today. It says, "I'm not even sorry," which my husband will sadly tell you is very appropriate. But what's your vision for Nasty Gal? I know you're opening your first stores. Is this like a J. Crew for a different kind of taste? Is it something else?
I think what we're doing is pretty different from J. Crew. I think J. Crew's riffing on a lot of Americana and things that have been in the retail and especially the brick and mortar landscape for a long time, and they do an incredibly good job of it. Our stores, we're talking about stores? So Nasty Gal.
Well, J. Crew has a website too, so I'm just talking about the marriage of the two.
Yeah.
What does it become?
Yeah, I would say, Nasty Gal grew out of a conversation. So it was me literally talking to my customers every single day with my voice. And I've built a brand from it, and that voice is consistent today. It was consistent through the book that I put out into the world. It's consistent when I open my mouth. And I think, customers are extremely savvy today. So it's a very different experience going into a store that has been around for a really long time, that's probably owned and operated by people who are nothing like you. And because, our customers have been in touch with us and we've cultivated that relationship for, going on 8 years now, it's something that everyone's trying to work back to, that all these big brands are spending a lot of time I guess strategizing, where for us it's where we started, so it makes it a lot easier. And where that conversation extends, I'm really excited about how far we can take that, and I think it extends into retail stores, it extends into content. I'm not a purist in terms of everything existing online. I think community is community, and the more places we can engage with our customer in ways that are authentic, and that word's it doesn't usually come out of my mouth, but I think it's an important word. Wherever we can and whatever we can do, I like to play with kind of the boundaries of the conventional and the unconventional in a way that is really exciting and I guess unexpected. So.
What do you think of Facebook and Twitter adding things like buy buttons? What will their role in e-commerce be?
Yeah, social built Nasty Gal. Social and word of mouth built Nasty Gal, period. And I'm really, really proud of that. But there's so many social platforms now that they're completely agnostic. There are people from such different walks of life interacting with one another, and there's a bodybuilder, and there's a food person, and there's all of these different things happening. Repeat your question. Sorry.
Facebook and Twitter
adding buy buttons.
Is that going to make a dent?
Yeah, it very well could. I think the customer experience of a transaction starting on a platform that is not owned or operated by the person who's actually responsible for curating those products and having the relationship with the customer is very tricky. I think it'll work really well for commodity-based businesses. That's not at all what I want to be. At a certain scale, there's always the customer who's looking for a dress, and we will have those customers and we will serve them, and hopefully they'll discover us in those places, but that's not really the most pure first touch point that I would want our customers to have.
Brian, Uber and Airbnb invented the sharing economy, really, and invented trust in a new kind of way, a new kind of trust. We hear so much about the challenges with regulators around the world. Uber has been very straightforward. They're waging a political campaign against taxis. How do you look at it? How do you plan to work through the challenges that you face? Are you working with governments? Are you waging a war against them, against hotels?
Well, you didn't ask my vision, so why don't I...
Well, I thought that would give you an opportunity to
so
share.
Why don't I say that first, and then that probably would instruct how we work with cities. So, and I'll just demonstrate with a story. So early 2012, I met a host in London, and his name is Sebastian. And he's probably in the late 50s, he lived in North London, and Sebastian comes up to me and he said, Brian, there's this word you never use in your website. And I said, well, what's that word? He said, that word is friendship. I'd love to tell you a story about friendship. And I said, okay, tell me the story. He says, 6 months ago, the London riots broke out outside my home, and I was very scared. The next day, my mom called me to make sure I was okay, and I said, yeah, Mom, I'm okay. And she goes, well, what about the house? And he goes, yeah, the house is okay too. He said, here's the interesting thing. Between the time that my mom called me and the time the riots broke out was a 24-hour period of time. And he said, in that period of time, 7 of my previous Airbnb guests called me to make sure I was okay. He said, think about that for a moment. 7 of my guests called me before my own mother did. And this summer, around the world, we had 425,000 people a night living together, experiencing the world together, and they came from 190 different countries. So that's every country in the world but North Korea, Iran, Syria, and Cuba. And so our vision, our core purpose, why we exist, is not just about rooms. It's not just about travel. I think at our heart, the bigger idea is about this idea that you can bring the world together by providing this sense of belonging for people. And you can provide that experience of belonging anywhere in the world in 34,000 cities. So that's our high-level idea. And to do that, if we're the kind of company that's going to try to bring people together, then it would not be in our values to be waging wars with cities. We want to enrich cities. We want cities to want us, and we fundamentally think cities could be better because of the sharing economy. I think cities used to be communities. They got very mass-produced, and then suddenly you're around more people than you've ever been, but you might be more lonely than you ever have been. Strangers in a strange land. And we want cities to feel a little more like villages again. We want them to feel like communities. And so our whole process has been working with cities, collaborating with cities. And 2 days ago, San Francisco passed a new law recognizing Airbnb, and that was a 2-year collaboration with the city. So we didn't try to fight them. We didn't try to corner them into changing a law. We actually worked with them. And when you show them your store and you show them you can enrich the city economically, like a city like New York or London, we can generate over $1 billion for the city in the next year. Socially, bringing people from 190 countries together for the first time, and environmentally, you can win people over. But they have to understand you, and you have to understand them.
So war against, campaign against, that would not be in the Airbnb vocabulary?
I don't think so.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about your management styles since, as we've mentioned, you're also young. Or old, however you want to look at it. Sophia, you wrote a book about it. It's called Girl Boss. We've got the cover. You've got some interesting policies at your company, a no a-holes policy. Sheryl Sandberg has her own campaign called Ban Bossy, and yet you have a book called Girl Boss. Mm-hmm. Is there a difference in your message? What is the message?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, let me think. There's a conversation happening with women right now that I think is really important. And it's one that I found myself a part of instead of really intended to insert myself in, but I wrote a book. That was not an accident. And people like to simplify things. So I saw on Instagram the other day something that said it was like women who are assertive are considered bitchy. I don't know if I should say B word or, but
I went for a-hole, but I love it.
I've never really experienced that, and I think as soon as you simplify things to the point where you can't say no, that is actually bitchy, that assertiveness should replace bitchiness. Anyway, yes.
So do you think that your message is at odds with hers?
With hers? No, I mean, I have my own message. It came out very, very organically through writing the book.
And it is.
Yeah.
It's such a honest portrayal of you and how you lead. And so I just want to get an idea of what that style is.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, that I'm pretty open about what I'm learning along the way, and that I'm open with the team, regarding what I'm capable of and what I'm learning. And I surround myself with people who are smarter than me, and feel very privileged to learn from them every day. But there are things that I used to kind of proclaim that I no longer believe in. For example, the company grew so fast that, I had such senior people working under me that, I never really, they managed themselves. The company grew so fast that the people who reported to me very quickly went from, someone that I had to kind of handhold to someone who really didn't need to be managed because they showed up and wrote their job description as we worked together. And I think that's partially true, but I think everybody does need to be led. And as someone who started a business in a pool house in Pleasant Hill, really, behind a computer, I find myself much better in writing, but increasingly it's been expected of me to speak outwardly, to articulate things for the company that they really need. Where to me, when you're an entrepreneur and you're self-led and you're self-motivated and you don't need praise, you're constantly lashing yourself and probably not celebrating your own successes as much as everyone thinks you should be. It's taken me a long time to relate to what everyone who needs to be led and wants to be led really needs, and that's been a work in progress for me.
And what's your style?
What's my style? Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I'm probably like you guys. I'd never managed anyone before, so my style is developing. I mean, I think I've learned a lot of lessons actually from the people that I've worked with that were really unexpected. And I think the first lesson that I learned was that really great people, they want to be challenged to do incredibly ambitious things. And it's a weird thing. You'd think recruiting people who are leaving a really well-paying job, you might want to tell them why it's going to be a safe place. But if you tell them that it's going to be this crazy adventure and we're going to try to do something really amazing, a certain type of person self-selects into that, and then you actually have a better chance of accomplishing this really big thing. And it's almost counterintuitive. So I think one thing I try to do is I try to set kind of a vision for the company that's incredibly ambitious, but then articulate a path that everyone can take part in figuring out how to get there. I think a second thing for us as a company that's young is it's really important that I find out like what I'm good at, what I'm not good at, and then find people that are really good at the things I'm not good at. And that doesn't just mean functional skills, because there are many of those and they're self-evident, but also kind of personality like things about me. So like I'm not like the most charismatic, like happy-go-lucky like person. So I found people that are not only exceptional in a function, but they have that trait and they can motivate people in a really good way. I'm not like the most organized person in the world, and so one of the first people—
Your board says otherwise.
Yeah, well, Pinterest is designed to make everyone look organized. Yeah, so one of the first things I did is like, look, I want an experienced leader who, by personality, like loves operationalizing stuff. So I think that's a second thing. And I think that the third thing that I'm trying to figure out as a leader how to do is I really believe that Pinterest's success was largely based on having people from lots of different disciplines work together. And where I was, at other companies, it was very, very engineering-led, like above all other disciplines. And I believe very strongly that if you can get people from lots of disciplines, like engineering and design and writing and community building, and if you can actually create an environment where they can work efficiently towards a common goal, which is not the same as always agreeing all the time, you'll get materially better results. And so we've been really trying to figure out how do we create the environment where that's possible. It's really tricky, but I believe it's like worth all the work for it, because I think you're going to be able to build things that no one could have built before if you have all those different skills going in the same direction. So.
Brian, how about you?
Yeah, so like Sophia and Ben, I had not really managed people before. I played sports growing up, so I was a captain of a team, and I guess that's a reasonable metaphor. That like I don't see myself like a boss in traditional sense. It's more like a captain of a team, collaborating with people. I think that you go through a journey when you start a company, because the first thing you do when you start a company is you have to build a product, and you're doing everything yourself. So I tell people that every single job in the company, except for some parts engineering, I've done. And at some point, you have to switch to building the company that builds the product from building the company. And then what you learn very quickly, that I learned, was it's all about people, literally. And so I spend, for a good period of my time, I spent probably half the time just hiring and like working on developing as a leader and leading the team. And as a CEO, I totally agree that you really got like 3 jobs. The first job you have to do is clearly articulate a vision. And that vision has to be repeated over and over and over. And whether you're doing an interview or you're adapting it outwardly or inside the company, you have to do that. And then you've got to get the right people aligned along the right strategy. The way I think about how I spend my time is I kind of put it in 2 buckets. The first is if Airbnb is a ship, I have to be the captain of that ship. And so if you imagine like a boat in the sea and you kind of draw a water line, my first job is to focus on anything below the water line, anything that could sink the ship. And so I focus on that. And the second thing I do is focus on 2 or 3 things that I'm uniquely passionate about that I'm good at, I think. And so one of them is product, the next is brand, the third is culture. And I'll speak for a little bit on culture. I think culture for us is incredibly important. I think culture is simply just a shared way that the company does something, and it's kind of what people might consider the soul or the magic inside the company. And one of the things we want to do is build a long-term company. I'd love for a company the last thing I want is to build a company, work super hard, and like 20 years from now, just not to exist. That would kind of feel a little pointless. So I'd love to build a company that can endure. And I don't think our products will necessarily endure. I mean, technology changes so fast. But the thing that could endure is the soul of the company. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I do is I reinforce our values all the time. And I'm not here to educate an executive that we hire about how to do their job, but I can educate them about our values and the unique ways we do things.
On the issue of brand,
yes.
You guys recently changed your logo.
Yep.
We've got a shot of it. I know you've been on the record. You say it looks like an ear.
It looks like a mini
What do
thing.
you guys think? But, you stuck with it. It was controversial. What did you learn from that?
Well, I mean, if I was afraid of controversy, I wouldn't have started Airbnb, first of all. So I thought the reactions were pretty amazing. There were Tumblr blogs about what people did with the logo. Some of my favorite tweets was, "Where on the Airbnb logo did the bad man touch you?" And apparently this logo is not allowed more than 100 feet near a school. Some schools, but I think Honestly, I think I like our brand to be so iconic that when somebody sees somebody naked in the future, maybe say, wow, you look like the Airbnb logo. But no, but in all seriousness, the real description of what this logo is this first logo on the left was an identity that we came up with in like 2 weeks, and it wasn't meant to be an icon that endured. And so we realized, well, we need something that represents what we're about. And what we're about is belonging, this idea of embracing and bringing people together. And so we wanted something that was a universal icon. We're in 190 countries, so we didn't want to have a logo like Google or Facebook where it was a word. So we wanted something that was so simple that it could be replicated. And the other pretty cool thing about the logo is so simple that anyone can draw it. You can draw it in the sand. And we built this tool for the community to be able to take it. And the reason we did that is we don't see ourselves as a mass-produced brand. Like, the Apple logo can't be changed or the other logos, but our product are people. And every one of them is different. So we wanted an expression to be pretty unique. So that was kind of the idea of what we were trying to do with the brand. And I think hopefully some of the things you'll see will be built on top of this foundation.
Okay, well, last question from me, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. But Marc Andreessen and other venture capitalists like Fred Wilson and Bill Gurley have been on a bit of a tear recently talking about high valuations, companies raising too much money too fast. Since we opened with Andreessen, I thought it fitting we close on him. But in one of his recent tweet storms, and there were many tweets, I could only pick a few, he said, new founders in the last 10 years have only been in the environment where money is always easy to raise at higher valuations. That will not last. When the market turns, and it will turn, we will find out who has been swimming without trunks on. Many high burn rate companies will vaporize. Finally, there are exceptions to all this, but if you're reading this, you're almost certainly not one. They are few and far between.
Sounds like a curse. God.
Okay, so Airbnb has a $10 billion valuation, Pinterest a $5 billion valuation. Do you consider yourselves an exception when you read something like that?
No.
You're not an exception.
Oh.
Yeah, I think the way you should think about it is investing. And there's two ways to think about it. The first is, like, how big of an investment do you want to make? And that degrees in your threshold of risk. Our view is we want to make really huge bets. And the company generated money from the day we launched, and we want to make huge bets in the company. And I think there's nothing wrong with investing in the future. Apple showed this, Amazon showed this for many years, so there's nothing wrong with investing in the future. What you do want to do, though, is you want to maintain, like, a good, scrappy kind of values. And I think Amazon and some other companies figured this out, that you want your core business over time to become increasingly profitable, and you want to use those profits to invest in new businesses and new opportunities. So I don't think it's important for an early stage company or a startup, even in hypergrowth, to be profitable, but it is really important that you have very good financial fitness and you have scrappiness. And one of our core values is to be a serial entrepreneur. And so whenever somebody tells me they need X thousand dollars to do something, I point to the cereal box and say, we literally had no money. And you never want to lose that kind of scrappiness because the constraints bring out creativity. And this is something we continue to hammer home in the company.
Ben, how do you feel about what Mark's been tweeting about?
I don't know. I think when we first started the company, it was very difficult to raise money. It was 2008. The financial crisis had just occurred. I think it took me, my co-founder, more than a year and a half to raise $500,000 at not very enviable terms. And I think a little bit of that is burnt into the DNA of the company today. People said, like, oh, why did you raise so much money? I was like, well, we're going to build something that I believe will be great. We want to kind of do for discovery what Google did for search. And that may take a long time. And we're very transparent about that with our future investors. And if they're willing to go along with us on that ride, we take that responsibility deadly seriously. So if there's an opportunity to raise capital that can insulate you against kind of the future a little bit, that can allow you to take more bets and risks, I think it's the right thing to do. But I agree with Brian. I think if people don't value money, they'll spend too much of it and then they'll go out of business. So
do you think you're the exception?
Well,
I don't really know what the
I think
exception
we're,
is.
First of all, Marc Andreessen is one of our investors. He comes to our board meetings. We've talked about this subject, and I don't think we were a subject, of course, but I don't think it's a matter of being an exception. It's a matter of finding a balance, right? Like, you don't have to be a profitable company the day you launch. It's okay to be investing, but you always have to make sure that you're not bleeding money and you're really, really like, you've got like a thrifty, frugal culture, and you can see a path to be building like an extremely profitable business in the future.
All right. Questions. There are a few already. Go for it.
Roman with Patel. Sophia,
Hi.
you're a voice of a generation. So few people go from zero to hero, and even fewer women. What would you say your message is for all the young women, and I think a lot of guys also that follow you?
Yeah, I think, the conversation around women is really interesting. I think, when I talk to a group of people and a woman raises her hand and she says, what you're doing for women is amazing, that's cool, but I never really set out to do that. Even though the book is called Girl Boss, I really don't talk about being a girl in it. And I think part of my success is showing up in a room and just being a voice at the table and not being like, I'm a woman in the room. As soon as you think of yourself as an exception, everyone else is going to see you as an exception. And I think there's kind of like a psychic juju that like you have to cultivate to do anything that is great. So I think, it's not about more. I get to the result of more women-led businesses, women doing cool things, women breaking the mold of what's traditionally expected of them, female entrepreneurship, I didn't set out to be this like outlier. And I think it's a sad fact that I am. So there has to be a conversation about that, about women doing more things like I've done, and sometimes to make a taboo like less taboo, you have to really like exploit it or just talk about it a lot. And I think that's probably what's going to have to be done, but that's not the end. That's not the end goal. Like at the end of the day, when that's all said and done, and there is less disparity, that conversation should probably end.
Right. It's scary to put yourself out there and talk about life as a woman, and so I think it is great that you've been willing to do that. Next question.
Hi, I have a question for Brian. Yeah. So, really love Airbnb, but I think that in the past couple of years, Airbnb changed as like really suitable and good for budget traveling to more expensive way of going somewhere. For example, like some years ago, Airbnb was like, hotel is so expensive, let's rent a flat. And that's how people traveled. But now if you compare the prices between like Airbnb apartment and a room, like traditional hotel, you might want to choose hotel because it's much cheaper. So do you think that by growing your brand and becoming more and more like reputable and popular, you lose this segment of budget travelers?
That's a good question. I mean, we started for budget travelers. We used to literally say our tagline was a cheap, affordable alternative to a hotel. The way I think about our market is we want to be on the very edges. I want to be able to offer places that are $20, $30 a night, but also places that are $10,000 to $20,000 a night. If you actually look at the average price per night that people are booking, it hasn't changed that much over the last 4 years, and there are actually more budget options than before. I think the brand perception, though, has changed. The brand perception is moved up market and it's wider, but I think it's just a matter of us not leaving the budget segment, but we're also starting to move more up market. And I think part of the branding that we've been doing and try to the path of the next couple years is really about capturing this idea. We want to create a world where everyone can be able to use Airbnb, not just people when they're young or people when they're on a budget. So, but that's our roots, and we'll never leave that. We're just going to expand beyond that. Thank you, though.
One last quick question and a quick answer.
Hi, my name is Raji. I attend the Academy of Art University. You can check my ID if you want to. I was wondering if you could speak about design and the importance of design and hiring designers and working with designers at a startup, and how you maintain like a standard or create balance between the design and the limited resources of a startup, and how that affects not only your user base, but internally and investors.
Ben, why don't you take that one?
Sorry, the question is, how do we value design?
And use limited resources to hire good designers.
I mean, we do. I think that design is a discipline that creates value for our users, just like engineering and just like writing. And so it's baked into the very fabric. My co-founder is a designer. I I think where I think a lot of designers historically have been frustrated is that they are brought in on the tail end of a product and asked to like slam some paint on it, and that was their job. But design is a discipline about solving problems, just like engineering, and so I think if you can have them in the front of a process, you'll get a materially better product. And I actually really believe that the average level of design literacy and taste in the world is extremely high. I think that even if you're not a designer and you can't talk about typography or easing, like you know quality when you see it because the devices you use every day are some of the best designed hardware and software products ever created. And so I think that over time it'll become the standard, and now it's a huge advantage for the companies that can leverage it.
One other thing I would say is, so when I went to RISD, they had like these business classes, and there was this kind of obsession with how can we get design in the boardroom, right? So traditionally designers would report to engineers or they report to marketing people, and designers wouldn't be in the boardroom. So there's this obsession with how can we get designers to be in the boardroom. And one of the things that occurred to me was no one even asked the question, why couldn't a designer run the boardroom? And at Airbnb, one of the things we try to think about is there's a sense of design thinking that like it's not just about the product, it's not just about the website. It's about design is not just how something looks, it's how something works, and it's about providing thought and care for every part of a company. And so we really like to do things from the inside out. And so I think this is a really great like trend that's happening.
Ladies and gentlemen, Brian Chesky, Sophia Amoruso, Ben Silbermann, thank you so much. Really appreciate you doing this.